always kind of tough to follow some of that stuff. I greatly appreciate what Brenda had to say. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. And I think today is kind of interesting. We've been going through the book of Daniel, not so much the prophecy. We may do that at a later date. We're looking primarily at the person Daniel and all the different things. We want to be a Daniel, so we were looking at the different things, the qualities that he had. And if you remember, Daniel was revealed 2 different dreams that were given by 2 other men, and then he was given 4 visions himself. And if you look at the 4th one, which is where we're at today, and that'll do a little bit about it. Just giving you a background on that'll help us. If you remember in Daniel 2, he had the statue, the 4 different parts of the statue, the 4 different empires that were going to rule. And then you had Daniel 7, you remember he talked about them again, the different animals, talking about the lion, the bear, the leopard, and so on, and the dreadful beast, talking about the 4 empires. In Daniel 8, he primarily was focused on the ram, talking about the Medes and Persians, and then he also talked about the goat with the 4 heads, talking about Greece. In Daniel 9, then you remember he was reading Jeremiah, and he prayed and asked, he knew the 67 years into the 70-year punishment, and the time was about up, and he asked what's going to happen to my people. And then God told him there'd be 490 years of under Gentile rule. And so he was aware of that. What happens in the beginning then in chapter 11, you have to keep in mind, this would have been 2 years later after Daniel 9 when he was doing it. In 536 BC when this takes place, you know that because of what's being said in chapter 11 with the time frame of Darius and Cyrus. And what happened is that the decrees had just been given and people are now going back to the land. They're living in peace. Israel is allowed to go back to the land, and things are going well. And so Daniel now is given a vision, and a vision is not good for his people. Now what happens, and I think it really is kind of fitting, what happens to these young men and women when they find out they're expecting? What kind of news is that? We're already talking about, we have different ones going in, now they've got the open heart surgery. Is that kind of news you want to hear? You have different ones. We all have different times we get news. I had 2 guys, friends of mine, who've been at work, been working with them 17 years. They get called in the office and they get their walking papers. One's 55, one's 62. Kind of tough to go find a job. What are you going to tell them? What type of things do you have? So I want you to think about it when you look at Daniel chapter 11 then. And we're just going to look at a few things that can help us because we all are going to face times when we will not understand. But Daniel is a man who understands. And he gives us a lot of things to think about. Let's look at it in chapter 10, starting in verse 1. We'll see the first one, and we'll look at the different ones. Daniel chapter 10, verse 1. And notice it tells you there, it says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that'd be 536 BC, we know that based upon history, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar. The message was true and one of great conflict. But he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. So he gets a vision in chapter 11, which he's about to tell us about. But he doesn't like it. But does he understand it? He understands what's being said. It's like going in and all of a sudden you find out you've been diagnosed with cancer. You've been given different news. So what are you going to do then if you're Daniel? You're given news about your people. Now remember, how old is he by this time? This would have been when he was 69 years that he's been in captivity in Babylon. If he went when he was 16, if you don't know the exact age, he was a teenager. 69 plus 16 equals 85 years of age. Okay? And it could have been 17, you don't know the exact age. So that gives you in his mid-80s. Probably he did not return to Israel with the others because of his age, as well as he is... Remember, he is in the administration of the king, and he probably was not allowed to leave. So let's think about it. What are you going to do when you seek this? I want you to see the first thing that he does as a man of understanding. He knows what it is. First thing he does is he seeks God's face. What's next? When we get news that we don't understand, how many of us are seeking God's face? What should I do? Let's see how he does it. Notice in verse 2, in those days, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. I did not eat any tasty food, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any anointment at all until the entire 3 weeks had been completed. He's seeking understanding. By the way, the stuff that's going to happen is going to be against Israel into Israel long after Daniel was going to be gone. How many of us have enough concern for other people, even when it's going to be after we're gone, that we're going to then fast and mourn? And how can I help my people going through this? So he seeks God's face. He's sincere when he does it. Second thing you have, we kind of jump around a little bit. Look over in verse 12. This is after the angel comes to him. And notice what it says. The angel speaking to him, and he says, then he, when the angel said to me, Daniel, do not be afraid, Daniel, for the first day that you set your heart on understanding this, and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come to respond to your words. He understood the message, you remember we saw in chapter 1, or in verse 2 and 1, but you also notice then he wants understanding of how can I help my people. He knows the difficulty, but what do we not do with it? How many of us are willing to humble ourselves before the Lord? You see these signs put in our yards. I mean, we see it all over our community. 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 14. How many can even know what the verse says? Remember, if my people shall call upon my name and do what?
Humble themselves.
Humble themselves. What else?
Pray.
Seek his face, pray, and turn from their wicked way. You ever wonder how many times nothing's happened in our country because we haven't done those things? We haven't done it. It's interesting, Daniel, by the way, you think about how righteous it says both times when he did this in the last 2 chapters, he humbled himself. How does a righteous man like Daniel humble himself? If he needs to humble himself, what about you and I? How many of us need to humble ourselves? You notice also it's interesting that happens when you're in this time. Notice in chapter 10, the third thing about seeking his face. Notice things. Not only sincerity, but humbling himself. And notice in 16 to 19, talks about Daniel is speechless. He's face down in verse 16. Behold, one who resembled a human being touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. And he said to me, who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me. I have retained no strength. How can my servant of my Lord talk to such of my Lord? As for me, there remains just no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. Can that happen to you when you get some bad news? How many times you just don't have any strength, you can't go on? Daniel hears all this, but notice what does God do? The angel then does what? The angel then in verse 19 touches him. May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Daniel's now been given the strength, and he's able to listen to what God says. So when you and I get the bad news, how many of us are sincere? And we really were seeking and break down and seek his face. Notice Daniel gives up the things. He wasn't doing it to be seen by men. He was humbling himself before the Lord. He really was doing it. And he also, you notice then, he needed strength to get through it. Anytime you ever hear things you just can't go on, I just can't put another day in front of him. You ever ask God for that strength, he gets you through it. Call me, I'll answer you, and what? Show you great mighty things. What does we tell you? You're too weak to go on, and you can get on the wings of eagles, right? Isn't that what he says? So once you think about it, you have the same thing. When you have this man of understanding, but he seeks God first, what's next? We need to do the same thing. What is next? We even ask as a church, what's next? What do we need to do next? So you're thinking about it, it was amazing. David, the Amalekites, you remember in 1 Samuel chapter 30, you remember when he's off fighting and the Amalekites come in and take all the women and children? David comes back, and you remember he starts and he asks God, what should I do? And everybody's wanting to stone him. God then says, pursue. How many of us will stop in the middle of it? The longer you wait and pray, the further the enemy gets away. But we want God's plan when we go to do something. So think about that when you do it. And so the first part is in seeking God's face. What are you facing with? What tough news do you have? And will we humble ourselves and seek what does he want me to do? The second thing I want you to notice in this chapter, it's amazing what you have in this, is that there's a spiritual battle going on. It's still going on in our country and all our world today. I want you to notice this. It's amazing what you have. You have this angel. Notice in chapter 10 and in verse 13. Seek God first. Second thing is spiritual battle. Notice in verse 13. The angel speaking. He says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with kings of Persia. So in other words, God sends the angel to come to Daniel, and demon forces do what? They stop and won't let him come. Michael, one of the chief angels, there's rank, comes and releases him. Go down a little bit further. I don't think we realize the spiritual battles and warfare that's going on in the heavens that's going on right now. Let's go a little bit further even down and notice in verse 20, and then I'll give you some points about it. Verse 20 of chapter 10. The angel speaking, and he said, do you understand when I came to you? Well, I shall now return and fight against the prince of Persia. So I'm going forth, and behold, a prince from where? Greece. You mean there are angelic forces, good forces over nations, and there are angelic forces of demons over nations. I think it's important for us to recognize it. Go then to verse 21. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. You ever wonder, you look throughout history, and you wonder how in the world did Hitler, so many times people tried to kill him, and what was he protected? They're demonic forces. You find the same thing today in so many different things going on in parts of the world. There are angelic forces and there are demon forces that are fighting constantly. And we need to recognize the forces. That's why we need to have the armor in Ephesians 6. Interesting that the last thing on just in verse 1 of chapter 11 is an interesting, notice the angel is still speaking. Notice what he says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, who's I? The angel, he's the one speaking. He said, I rose to be an encouragement and protection to who? To Darius. Because Darius is doing good things for the Jews, the demons are going to want to take him out by using men. And the angel is helping to protect Darius, a non-believer, because of what he's doing for Israel. So when you stop and you think about it, when bad news comes, we need to seek God's face. But second of all, we need to recognize there's spiritual battles that are going on. In spiritual battles, you notice there's regimes. There's Satan's regime and there's God's regime. You notice also there's rank. There's demons that are stronger than some. There's God's angels, and so there's battles going on. Notice they also had realms. One was over Greece. One's over Persia. Does that mean that America has a demon? Does that mean we have angels? We have it everywhere in every nation. We're told myriads of angels, are we not? You notice also there are certain roles. Angels have roles. Hebrews chapter 1, you have guardian angels. You have seraphim angels. You have different angels with different roles. Demons have roles as well. So I think when we think about it, how are we preparing then? In Ephesians chapter 6, are we not told your battle is not against flesh and blood? But if that's the case, how many Christians have their armor on? In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 11, it says, put your armor on. It's aorist tense, which means you put it on one time and you never take it off. If you take it off, as most of us do, when is Satan going to fire a dart at you? When you have it on or when you don't have it on? And I'll challenge you, you talk to 98% or 99% of the Christians today and you ask them what is their armor and can you name the pieces, they couldn't tell you any of the pieces. But you talk to anybody that's in the military and you give them their gun and they can take it apart and put it back together blindfolded. Why do they know their armor but we don't know ours and we don't know how to use it? And prayer is one of them. So you think about it, do we really believe we're in a spiritual battle? Daniel did. And so I think about it, how prepared are you for your spiritual battles that we're facing? We are in battles. So the first two things, remember, seek God's face when you get the news. Second of all, recognize you're in a spiritual battle. The third thing, just in this chapter and these couple of chapters, I think is interesting, is in Daniel chapter 11. Notice in verse 2 and 3 and so on. Notice he says, Daniel, the angel speaking to him, I'm going to tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are coming to rise in Persia, then a fourth will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong, his riches, he'll arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. So there's going to be 4 kingdoms that are kings that are going to come in the Persian Empire after the one that's presently ruling. That all has occurred. That all did occur. The 4th one was Xerxes. Xerxes has a different name in Scripture. What's his name in Scripture? You remember? Ahasuerus. That's Esther's husband. He was the 4th one, and he then was taken over by Greece. Exactly what prophecy said. You remember, Daniel doesn't like the vision because he sees the struggle his nation is going to be going through. He then goes down in verse 3 and 4, he talks about the mighty king's going to come from Greece, which obviously we know as Alexander the Great. He was given in the previous 2 chapters when he had the 4 wings and then the 4 horns that come on the goat. And when Alexander the Great died, suddenly, 4 generals then split up the empires. 2 of them are not going to be talked about in this next part of the chapter. The reason they're talked about is Ptolemies and Seleucids. The reason they're talked about is because those 2 battled for the next few hundred years fighting over Israel. And you have this. You realize in this chapter, 6 Ptolemies and 8 Seleucids are mentioned specifically about what each one of the kings were going to do back and forth with Israel. There's no way that somebody, that's why most people today are trying to say Daniel is history, not prophecy. He couldn't have written this because you can't be this accurate. Everything he says is going to happen, happened. Just like he said. If that's the case, do we have a sovereign God? If we have a sovereign God, then when things happen in our life, is he sovereign? We need to recognize sovereignty. So when we find out we're going to have open heart surgery, hey, he's sovereign. When we find out we have cancer, he's sovereign. The question isn't, is it going to happen? What do we do with it? So you look at it, I think it's interesting. It goes through all these different ones, these different marriage licenses, who's going to come in, who's going to take over. He then gets into Antiochus Epiphanes, the 4th, who's then going to take over Israel. And they're going to have then the Maccabees, they're going to revolt against him. And this is all talking about it. 25 happened in 170 BC, 29 happened in 168 BC, 30 happened in 167 BC. Just check your history book. It's all there. Everything. It's interesting talking about it. At the end of verse 27, notice it said, at the appointed time. 29, at the beginning, at the appointed time. 35, at the appointed time. At whose appointed time? God's. It's important to recognize Daniel doesn't like what's going to happen to his nation. But he knows there is a God who has it appointed and he's in charge of everything. I need to fit into his plan. We want him to fit into our plan. So we need to seek God when we're in things coming. We should always, but when things happen, and what should I do? 2, recognize we're in a spiritual battle. 3rd, I think recognizing the sovereignty of God. He allowed things to happen. He allowed it to come into my life. Job chapter 1, remember you can touch my family, but you can't touch Job. Chapter 2, okay, you can touch Job, but you can't take his life. Nothing happens to our lives that God does not give the okay for. So think about it. Rather than ask why, we need to ask, what can I learn from it? How can I show you? The last one I want to show you, I know our time is up, but I'm so glad that Brenda came. I think it's so important. Chapter 12, notice in verse 3. Not only are we have the sovereignty, we have the spiritual battle, we have to seek his face. But notice this possibility that she already talked about this indirectly. Writing to Daniel, it says, those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expansion of heaven. Those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. You'll find it in chapter 11, talks about those who are showing the truth in the midst of a dark world are like stars. If we go outside right now, will our stars shine? Why don't you see them? It's daylight. So if we're supposed to be stars, we're going to be in what type of a world at what time of the day? Would you agree we're in a very, very dark world in our country today? We have a chance to be the stars, to shine brightly for Christ. You're going to find, though, both, this is talking about the tribulational period in 12, and chapter 11 is talking about the Antiochus Epiphanes time, when there's going to be a lot of refining and purging is going to take place. then, now, and in the future. If we want to lead people to Christ, we need to be stars in a dark world. But that's our choice. So let's just think about how we can apply this. Talk about Daniel was a man of understanding. Didn't like what was going to happen to his people, but he wanted to help them for the future. He's helping us even today. So notice, when I'm faced with tough times, do I humble myself and seek Him? Second one, how prepared are we for spiritual battles? When you go into a football game, you wear your equipment before you get on the field or after you get hit the first time. Third, recognizing that God's in control, will we humble ourselves and work with His plan? How many of us are constantly trying to get Him to change His plan? Third one, what type of star are you? Matthew 5, we're told we're lights, but we can hide it under a bushel, or we can do what? We can put it on the hill. I challenge us to put it on the hill in the middle of the night. We turn on our Christmas lights, and they look pretty. How many of us have our light on for our neighbors to see in our Christian life? To see in our Christian life. To see in our Christian life.